Okay, I think we can start. I think we have quite a lot of people. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Ducasse. I'm working for Can International for the renewable energy team. I'm here with my colleagues Mediatrix and Janet, and with three wonderful speakers, which I'm going to introduce you in a while. So thank you for joining this webinar. This is a kind of a follow-up of the webinar we had last month, where we also have had some Can experts, and we discussed about the opportunities that renewable can bring in terms of social and economical opportunities. So we talked about resilience, adaptation, green industrialization, local benefit sharing, and so on. So maybe we can share the link in the chat if you're interested, but today's webinar is a bit looking at the other side of the coin. So if we want communities and countries to be able to seize these opportunities, we need to understand what are the barriers and the challenges and how we can address them. That's particularly important now because there is let's call it a momentum around renewables for various reasons. The climate crisis, which is escalating as we know, but also more recently the new energy crisis. For those of you who are following the UNFCCC processes, we are hearing that we are in an era of implementation. There has been a new electrification target being announced a few days ago at Bonn, so which everything that it entails in terms of renewable energy capacity and transition minerals. And there is also, of course, the whole process around transitioning away from fossil fuel. And we know that means that if we want to phase out fossil fuel, we need to phase in renewables. So there is a momentum around renewables, but at the same time, there is a risk that we have a scenario where renewables are growing, and yet we are faced with the same inequalities in terms of energy access, in terms of economic development, but also in terms of violations of human rights or environmental rights that we have seen and that we are still seeing with the fossil fuel system. So this is why today's webinar is not really about just the barriers and the challenges of phasing in renewables at any cost, but it's really about how the barriers and challenges in phasing it renewable in a way that it's just and equitable, that really can benefit every community, every country, and that has there seems to be an echo, I don't know, and that has some positive benefits on the economy and so on. I'm hearing that there is an echo. I don't know if that's coming from my side, if somebody can confirm before I keep talking. Can you hear me correctly? Yes, okay. So Harriet, I don't know, maybe it's on your side, so let's see. So today we are going to, this is a very broad topic. We are not going to cover, of course, all the barriers and challenges that will require several webinars, I guess. But we are going to focus on a few of them, and notably a few challenges. The first one being that many countries are facing financial challenges and limited fiscal space to invest in renewables, and for multiple reasons. The second one is that many countries are not able to fully reap the economic benefits and potential of renewable energy because they are locked into extractive and unfair economic systems. And of course, the third one is that the renewable energy sector, and I include within that the transition minerals, is associated with social and environmental challenges that we, in particular for frontline communities, that we cannot ignore and that we need to address. So that's what we have a bit on the menu for today. And for this, we have three speakers that you can already see on your screen. So we have Shehrzadae Moeed, who is a research analyst at the Alternative Law Collective. Angela Asuncion, who is regional coordinator for Asia and Pacific with the Resource Justice Network. And still from the Resource Justice Network, we have Tezenas, who is head of policy and advocacy. So welcome home, all. Thanks for joining. And because today we have only 1 hour, I'm not going to spend too much time talking myself, and I will quickly move to all of you so you can give us some insights on the barriers and challenges. And I will start with you, Shehrzadae, maybe. So I would like you to explain to us through the lens of Pakistan, what are these challenges that you can observe, notably in terms of fiscal space and the financial condition and so on. And if you can maybe take us through what are the challenges that Pakistan has faced to finance the transition, and also, I'm guessing, unpack the role of some of international financial institutions, because we know they've been playing a key role in terms of the power sector for grids, infrastructure, and so on. So if you can unpack a bit all of this to start us with. And I already have a question, but I don't know if you want to cover it now or later, because we also, when we speak about Pakistan, we also hear this solar boom and the solar revolution, which is also coming from the decentralized, renewables. So I don't know if you want also to talk about it, or we can talk about it later if you prefer.
Yeah,
So
I'll
over to
cover
you.
that as well. Yeah, am I audible though? I just wanted to check.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much to Can for inviting me to speak to this. I was actually just going over LinkedIn a while back, and I was just seeing a lot of posts about Pakistan's solar revolution and a lot of international interest within that. Um, and there's a lot of justified optimism surrounding it, which, in the realm of climate news, it's actually good to see good news for once. But it's also important to understand that beneath the justified optimism, there is still quite a lot of deep inequality still there. And I want to preface the rest of this conversation by saying that being rich in solar deployment and having a lot of solar panels imported still means that we can still be any energy poor as a country. And that's definitely the case in Pakistan, where the deployment of solar, especially off-grid solar, is still quite unequal in the way it's happening. So my aim is to contextualize this within the broader context of MDB involvement in Pakistan's energy sector, and then understand how that has impacted the deployment of solar panels here. So we can really break this down into two key eras. The first one, I think, generally we're all quite familiar with, and this is the 1980s, 1990s era of neoliberalism and unbundling privatizations of, and specifically of the energy sector. We don't just see this in the context of Pakistan, we see it in Vietnam, in Thailand, across Southeast Asia, even Bangladesh, India to an extent as well. And this is really sort of the ground zero of Pakistan's current energy crisis, especially through mechanisms like capacity payments and the prioritization given to private actors. And this is also where we became heavily dependent on fossil fuel energy use. Prior to the 1990s, Pakistan's energy mix used to be around 70-30 in terms of renewables, well, which included hydropower at the time as well, but also thermal. So it was not as dependent on imported fossil fuels at the time. Um, and these policies that were introduced in the 80s and 90s were built on these structural conditionalities imposed by the IMF and the World Bank, which broke down a lot of these public sector enterprises, which they had helped to create. So the Water and Power Development Authority was one that the World Bank had a heavy influence on. And then they eventually broke it down, unbundled it, and turned it into whatever crisis mode it operates in now. We also see sort of the prioritization of private actors. So the narrative developed of the need to bring in FDI of foreign currency to increase tax revenue, and also to reduce the involvement of the state, to reduce subsidies, to reduce public sector enterprise, all of these things. And then in order to do that, you accommodate private actors a lot. So that's how you get to capacity payments, which are effectively a get out of jail free card for the private actors and the independent power producers. And we still live with the consequences of this policy today. The capacity payments was something that we could never really afford. And so what happened was that over time, because we could not pay the independent power producers on time, that debt kept accumulating. Because at the same time, we were prioritizing debt servicing to all of our foreign debtors, which includes the IMF and the World Bank, and then also the Paris Club countries, some certain Asian countries or Gulf countries within that as well. And around 2010 onwards, this sort of crisis starts exploding in our face, that this debt has accumulated so much that it's eroded so much fiscal space even more. And across the 2010s, we see this really sort of evolve into the second era. And this is where we sort of see more involvement from the World Bank and the IMF, but they've detached themselves to an extent where they aren't immediately directly saying, okay, we will tell you exactly what to do, how to privatize, and all of these things. We will just, we will push you a lot more in that direction anyway, but we won't directly create the policy as we did in the 1990s. So what you see is higher energy prices, higher electricity tariffs, extremely expensive fossil fuel imports, which are becoming a key part of the economy as well. And then we arrive really into this solar era around in the 2016, 2017 era, where Chinese solar panels start coming into the country. And I'll contextualize this a bit later as well, how that deployment is also quite unequal. Uh, but the high energy prices really created a higher demand for wanting to move away from the grid, from moving away from a lot of the centralized energy sources. And also, I think people were seeing that the subsidy removals and all of these things were about to come eventually. So even industries started thinking of moving away from this because of the high costs that were within these. And then around 22, right after the floods in 22, which caused around $30 billion in damage, we were put into an austerity program by the IMF, and we sort of categorized that as a green austerity program because it was packaged as a green deal. We had the World Bank's resilience and sustainability facility that was also given to us in 2025 on top of the current austerity program that we have. And under the context of completely eroded fiscal space, under the context of losing $30 billion, under the context of thousands of people who died, we were told to cut down on energy subsidies. We were told to just, devalue the currency, increasing the costs even more. And I think what this revealed to us at the same time was that the IMF kept pushing us, especially CSO networks, to impose a tax on solar panels. We had been opposing that since 2019. We were successful on holding it back until 2025. But since the 2025 floods, we were not able to convince them anymore. So right now, there is a 10% tax on solar panel purchases. And what that exposes is this really paradoxical and confused approach from the IFIs themselves, because at one point you have programs like the RSF, which are saying that you need to reduce your emissions, that you need to transition more towards the green economy. But then at the same time, you have a solar tax because you want to raise more revenue in order to service your debt. And that's really the consequence you get when you have so much eroded fiscal space, that even in a time where climate change is impacting your country severely, you're still forced to prioritize debt. And I remember looking at the figures over the past 3 years, we've serviced around uh, $20 billion in debt to the IFIs alone. And when you look at our healthcare and education budgets, our development budgets, all of those have been scaled down. Meanwhile, the debt servicing component has gone up, indirect taxes have gone up, and then you also see taxes on solar deployment. And to conclude, I'll also sort of just tell the broader ingredients of the solar rush and how they've been quite unequal in their deployment. Pakistan has a very interesting relationship with China, which is quite involved in the solar rush in Pakistan, because Pakistan was a dumping ground and still is a dumping ground for many Chinese consumer goods. They're able to throw them here consistently and without much pushback from the Pakistani government, because since 2016, China has been one of the biggest investors in the Pakistani economy. So even though the flow of outflows and the inflows are changing towards China, the dynamic of that relationship is very much formed with that same underlying structure that we had with Western incentives coming in, Western investment coming in, Gulf investments coming in. It's the same structure that China also is currently operating in and is quite complicit, right? We also see these Chinese contracting companies working on large hydropower plants in Pakistan, Chinese workers coming in, and a lot of money outflowing from that as well. And another problem with the solar deployment here is that it's really the richest households who have benefited the most from it, because they were able to get net metered connections. A lot of the off-grid deployment that you saw in low income, lower middle income households, none of that was net metered. A lot of Pakistan's solar deployment is still not recorded properly because we don't know how many people are actually net meter, because net metering is not necessarily the best metric for us to use, right? So a lot of this was unequal. A lot of the richer regions tended to benefit a lot. You have urban centers like Lahore, like Karachi, which have quite a lot of solar deployment. But when you go into more marginalized provinces like Balochistan, you go to the southern areas of Punjab, you go to the northern areas of Sindh, you see energy access still quite restricted, and the solar deployment has not reached those areas as much as we would really like it to reach. And so I think that's still contextualized within this inequality. Uh, that is put in place. And what Pakistan really reveals is that it's a complex model of policy and financial control, and how this is continuing into the era of energy transition and also into the current formulations for the green economy. We see this in the World Bank's approach with utility scale solar deployment. So they're pushing for 100 megawatts, 200 megawatt utility scale solar deployments. In Pakistan's renewable capacity, large scale hydropower is still included, despite the displacements caused by it. And within utility scale solar, we've also seen large scale land grabs being happening in the name of the energy transition. So, that's again like that paradoxical approach that's working. And then finally, you see the private sector still being prioritized, because all of our distribution companies, which were unbundled in the 90s and the 2000s, their health took a hit when the solar deployment happened because people started reducing demand. So the World Bank and the IMF are really in a bind right now, because they're also trying to protect the grid and the financial viability of distribution companies, because they're in line to be privatized in the next few years. If their profitability goes, then you don't really have much to privatize and much to offer to private actors. So they're actually inhibiting the growth of more and more solar deployment, while also saying that they are promoting the green economy and they are trying to push the economy towards more electric vehicle use. But really, the underlying structure beneath all of this is the one that's focused so much on debt servicing, on revenue generation, and does not necessarily care about what happens on the ground. In the recent crisis caused by the war, we've just seen that energy prices in Pakistan saw some of the highest increases in the entire region. And we were, I think, in the top five at least for some of the highest energy prices across the world. And a large part of that is because a third of our energy prices are just taxes and levies that were conditionalities from the IMF. And we were not able to cut down on them even in a time of crisis. And the people who pay for that are actors that the World Bank and the IMF simply do not count in their calculations. If you look at Pakistan's program documents, you will see no mention of lower middle income households, people who are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, still out of really no choice. And they have to suffer the most. So, just to conclude, I think the MDB approach is quite confused, quite paradoxical, and it's stripping renewable energy of its empowering capabilities. And in place of that, a lot of extractive models are being pushed, and the debate itself is being taken away from energy access as a human right, and being focused more on energy as a commodity. And I think we really need to start figuring out a way to recenter that narrative back to energy access and making sure that the country is still energy rich, despite and to make sure that the green transition is fair and equal in its distribution. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks to you. Thank you so much, because I know it's not easy in 10 minutes to bring so many elements, and I think it was very interesting and very clear. And I would have some questions, but also in interest of time, maybe we can move. But yeah, I think thanks for bringing these nuances and also this paradox, because we hear, as you say, we see everywhere the solar boom and everything is great and so on. But as you say, this also hides some inequalities, which are also important to mention and to address. We'll go back to you later to ask what solution we can put forward and how we can address those barriers. But before that, I want to move to Luc. So we heard about this question of fiscal space and so on, but there are also aspects like of trade and commodity exports and so on. So we are going to explore them through a specific topic, which is the transition minerals. There are like many other topics to address in the renewable energy value chain, if I may say, but this is one, of course, which is very important. And so, Luc, if you could maybe tell us, what are the global barriers which are preventing countries which have transition minerals to really access some of the economic benefits as well, and to move up the value chain. And the fact that there are those barriers, what are the implications in terms of socio-economic development for these countries and for the communities? So yeah, it's also a vague question, but I know you will be able to take us through this as well. So over to you, Luc.
Thanks a lot. I will bounce back on Shehrzadae, because renewable energy deployment is often talked about as an end in itself, whereas how it's deployed is the main battleground. And almost similarly to this, but it's almost the same question around transition minerals in the energy transition. When we're in the COP space, in the climate space, global north countries will try to focus on the carbon metric only. When we're in the trade space, global north countries will focus on, let's say, the traditional legalist approach to trade. And so I think that our main mission in those battlegrounds is to break the bubbles, to disseminate a vision where transition minerals extraction and beneficiations, renewable energy deployment, and green industrialization in all regions is actually operated in a just, equitable, and transformative manner. To address this at the Resource Justice Network, we connect just transition and resource justice, meaning that deploying transition critical technologies and extracting critical minerals must drive local value addition. That's a hashtag used by the trade space for the past 3-4 years, and allow affordable energy access. What prevents this? The first thing that needs to be addressed is something that's often called the commodity export model, which is a system where global south countries are pressured to extract and export raw material, unprocessed, untransformed, to wealthier nations. This is now happening with transition minerals. It has been happening with minerals since the colonial era, but it was also happening with oil. It's just how the resource inequality is framed in the world. So it's rooted in historical and colonial era frameworks, where extractive structures were systematically designed to fuel fossil-dependent industrialization in the global north, while freezing global south economies in pits. The transition to renewable energy today is heavily reliant on critical minerals. That's why they're being called critical by the same countries. So lithium, cobalt, copper, rare earth, etc. And this new version of extractivism, so extracting raw materials, creating value and energy in the north, this new version is rightly so described as green colonialism. The consequence it has on all global south regions is that it traps the region in severe structural dependency to the raw export, because the whole model of the economy in the country will be developed on just relying on raw exports. And they are being completely trapped into this because the investment necessary to actually develop the first maillon stages of the value chain, the money required to do that is actually capped to service the debt to the same countries. And so they're locked into this with a very limited fiscal space that Shehrzadae will address in his intervention later. Those like lower value, low wage nodes have two consequences. The countries, the regions are locked outside of economic sovereignty, energy sovereignty, almost infrastructural sovereignty, but also the peoples are locked outside of higher paying jobs. It's not just governments against governments, it's also citizens. The barriers, I won't get into the geeky stuff, but basically I tend to frame this in three big pots. The first pot is called policy space. So it's the ability for a country to enact policies that are critical to defend its interests. And so in our work, it's the policies that are critical for a transition to happen justly. This policy space is limited under WTO litigation, so it's states suing states. This happened, for instance, with the Indonesia limiting its raw nickel export. They were sued by the EU in front of the WTO. That's one bit. The second bit is the same policy space problem because of lawsuits once again, but it's with ISDS, investor state dispute settlement. And so it's not countries that prevents global south countries, it's global north companies. And that's under the World Bank ICSID. And so basically global north countries and companies use those fora to prevent countries from doing what they need to do to adapt to the climate crisis. This, what's being called as a regulatory chill, is the first battleground. The second battleground, which is the consequence of this, and is very, very visible today in the climate and trade space, can be framed as forum shopping. It's when someone uses this forum to prevent this from happening here, and this forum to prevent this from happening here. The global north, at the moment, will use trade policy in climate spaces to block certain things, and climate policy in trade spaces to block other policies, but they will scream if the global south does it. CBAM, so the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, was very public, so you must have heard about this. The attempts by the global south to move on, let's say, progressive trade policy in the climate space are systematically blocked by the same group of countries saying, this is a trade matter, this is a trade matter, this is a trade matter. However, in the WTO, they're saying, oh no, this is a climate subject, you shouldn't attack us. And so this big separation between trade and climate is being used by powerful countries. And one of the core battlegrounds in the coming few years on the lead to COP33, I'd say, is to force the merger between those spaces. And the final pot is the IP concentration, the technology monopolies, IPs, intellectual property barriers. There's a very, very strong monopoly on IP in the north. Companies, same things, which prevent global south countries that are resource rich from building industries based on the very minerals that they own. And beyond IP, practical access to technologies need to be fought. And for this to happen, we need to carry the work at WTO and at UNFCCC to make sure that this hoarding of climate critical technologies is dismantled. So yeah, global south economic and energy sovereignty is inherently tied to resource justice under this framing, because it's basically about dismantling the commodity export model. Deploying clean energy and green industries at scale is basically breaking the commodity export model. Voilà. So I'm going to stop here because the solutions are for later. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Thanks a lot. And I think we are like trying to make a list of, we are slowly building a list of barriers, and we talked about the IMF, the World Bank, and you now mentioned the WTO, ISDS, the intellectual property, and there are lots of barriers. And thank you for expanding them in such a short time. Two comments. No, one comment I want to make before we move to you, Angela, is that we are talking about transition minerals, but I think, Luc, what we described It's also something that we are seeing in other, I'm not sure how to call them, like products or areas. There is the case of hydrogen, which we are seeing it's very similar in Africa. Many countries are deploying renewable energy for hydrogen, which is going to be exported for other continents. And less known maybe, but I think also worth mentioning, there is the case of bioenergy. You have in Southeast Asia, you have many countries who are deploying basically forest, and then those are being extracted to build bioenergy capacities in Japan and other countries. So there are like a bit differences, of course, like there are environmental challenges and so on. But I think if you are interested in we had a report last year where we are also talking of this different type of extractivism, not just about transition minerals, but about other topics. And maybe we can put the link in the chat, I think, if you are interested in also making some connection between these topics. So yeah, we heard about these structural barriers, quite technical, I must say, but I think you both mentioned it that at the end, this has impact on people. Shehrzadae, you were talking about impacts on energy access. Luc, you were saying that it also limits the type of jobs that people can access. So of course, at the end, it is always people who are being affected by this. By these barriers and challenges. And this is what, Angela, I wanted you in particular to talk about. If you could take us through a bit the impact of these challenges and like economies on the frontline communities. And maybe just to start you off, I had last week the Business and Human Rights Center published their annual report on transition minerals. And they were reporting that in 2025, there were 329 new allegations of human rights violation, which is like a 33% year-on-year increase. And I think that's just a very shocking number, to be honest. And I'm hoping you can also try to explain to us why is it the case and what you are like observing when you are working with communities. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Julie. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you all today. And thank you so much to Ken for inviting us to have these important discussions. And I wanted to build off of the really fantastic presentations from Shehrzadae and Luc, and also underpin the fundamental role of green colonialism that is the foundations of what the energy transition is looking like so far. So in terms of business as usual mining and the energy transition, it risks reproducing the same colonial extractivist models of injustice under the banner of climate action. And so a quick overview is that the role of mining within the energy transition raises three key areas of concern. The first is intensification of mining exploitation. So the rush to mine these minerals intensifies long-standing and unresolved issues within the mining industry, such as corruption, indigenous and human rights violations, environmental devastation, water scarcity, gender-based violence. And like Julie mentioned, the Business and Human Rights Center just recently released their 2026 Transition Mineral Tracker results. And since 2010, there has been over 1,226 allegations of human rights abuses related to transition minerals for green technologies. And the surge in mineral demand has also intensified dispossession and land grabs, as nearly 70% of transition minerals sit on or nearby Indigenous lands. And so the second main area that we'd like to focus on as well is transition mineral greenwashing. So transition minerals are increasingly greenwashed. Mining has been expressed by the industry as a solution to climate change, when in reality, mining is responsible for 8 to 28% of global greenhouse gas emissions and is known for its widespread deforestation and destruction of carbon sinks. And then the last important factor is geopolitical issues and competition. So geopolitical tensions are also on the rise as wealthy nations secure transition mineral bilateral agreements with underdeveloped nations, which deepen inequalities and fuel ongoing exploitation for host communities. And it's important to note that from extraction sites to end use, transition minerals expose layers of violence that extend far beyond climate solutions and green technology. And while we know that these transition minerals are positioned as indispensable for renewable energy, mineral demand has also been absorbed into expanding defense technology. Militaries are responsible for 5.5% of global emissions, and rising defense expenditures under ongoing genocides and political rivalries also risks diverting scarce mineral resources away from renewable energy. And to scope back into the Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific hosts some of the world's largest mineral reserves necessary to transition to net zero economies globally. Our region produces 54.6% of nickel and remains host to 1/4 of global mineral resources, including 60% of the world's reserves of rare earth metals. And it's important to note as well that 6 of the 10 countries most affected by climate-induced natural disasters are in the Asia Pacific. So at the national level, the role mining plays within exacerbating climate inequity is outlined, for example, in the Philippines. And here are some photos taken from Bantay Kita's community fieldwork and mining affected areas that's juxtaposed alongside the increasing media headlines regarding the nickel boom in the Philippines. So climate inequity in the Philippines can be summarized in 4 key points. And the first is the Philippines contributes 0.35% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet is recognized as the most climate vulnerable country in the world under the World Risks Report. The Philippines is also the world's 2nd largest producer of nickel, a key mineral for electric vehicles and renewable technology. And for the past decade, the Philippines has been marked as among the deadliest places globally to be a land defender and activist, with mining being the most dangerous sector. Here, Indigenous peoples have lost around 20% of their land to mining projects in just 30 years, with over a quarter of these territories identified as protected carbon-rich watersheds. And to date, the mining sector contributes less than 1% to the nation's GDP, with mining provinces host to the highest poverty incidences and energy insecurity. So it's really important for us to ask ourselves, especially with Shehrzadae and Luke's presentation, across the green technology supply chain, who will the energy transition benefit and who holds the justice in the just energy transition? And so a community member from Surigao del Sur during our research with Bantay Kita had shared perfectly. I am for renewable energy, but not at the expense of being a sacrificial lamb for the energy transition. Just energy transition should be truly just, without destroying the environment, without destroying the community, and without destroying the livelihood of the people. And I remember when I heard this from the community member, it really resonated on the impacts of what justice truly means, and that it should be ensuring that justice is at the heart of the communities on the front lines of the impacts of climate inequity, of the impacts of renewable energy expansion, of the impacts of transition mineral exploitation. And so just to conclude, for us at Resource Justice Network and the Asia Pacific Transition Mineral Accountability Working Group, we understand that from mining and processing of transition minerals to the manufacturing and implementation of RE infrastructure, all the way to the recycling and rehabilitation, we believe that a truly just energy transition is one that addresses all issues and communities impacted throughout the entire length of the green technology supply chain, ensuring that no one is left behind. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you very much. And as you were speaking and mentioning the issues with transition minerals, I was thinking that we should mention the rest of the value chain, and you just did it. And I think it's important to remember that some of the issues that you mentioned, they are, also present when we talk about the manufacturing of renewable energy technologies, but also just in the setting of renewable energy projects where communities are not always being consulted or they cannot participate fully and so on. So again, we had to focus on a few topics, and thanks for expanding and showing that this is a matter of, this is a matter for transition minerals, but it goes also beyond transition minerals to the entire supply chain. I think we are doing good on time, so I think we can move to the second round of discussion that I wanted to have. I know so far we have had quite a sobering assessment of what are all the barriers and the challenges and all the impacts on communities at the end. And so I wanted to end this webinar by also looking at how we can address some of these barriers. What are the solutions that already exist? Maybe some countries are already implementing, or what needs to be done within like a short term to address some of these barriers and the way forward. And maybe I will start again with you, Angela, so maybe doing like the other way around. So you mentioned like a few issues like for human rights and so on. What are the key solutions, the key way forward to try and address these issues?
Thanks so much, Julie. For us to ensure rights-based and equitable transition for frontline communities, we believe that we need to build collective power from the ground up. And so frontline, local, and Indigenous community members affected across the supply chain, like we mentioned, from hosting transition minerals to hosting smelting, processing plants, to hosting large-scale RE, where oftentimes communities are displaced, all the way to hosting recycling processes. These communities are at the heart of the energy transition and must be recognized as rights holders that are fundamental to energy transition decision-making from the local all the way to the global levels. And I wanted to highlight, especially amidst the increasing intensification of geopolitical competition and free trade agreements being established at the global level for transition minerals, not only for green technology, but increasingly in 2026 for militarization, AI, data centers, and national security. One of the most essential actions to ensure a rights-based energy transition is ensuring that frontline communities have the resources, legal empowerment, knowledge, and built capacity on their rights, including the various legal and grievance mechanisms that are available for them to use if violations occur, and that these communities are capacitated on what the energy transition is and its implications on their communities themselves. And as well in this, how to demand shared prosperity and the inclusion of frontline communities in decision-making from the conceptualization of the project. And this includes ensuring that free, prior, informed consent is upheld as well. And so co-creating knowledge and research with frontline communities is necessary to establish the legal evidence for filing cases and for documenting and empowering community voices and demands within national, regional, and international decision-making spaces and plurilateral and multilateral fora. So in this case, this is how Resource Justice Network operates. We work directly with frontline communities to ensure that their voices are empowered and that there's opportunities for them to be in these different international and regional level decision-making spaces and fora to share their lived experiences and demands themselves. And so at the global level, it's fundamental that we strengthen human and environmental rights due diligence across the green technology supply chain. And this is a way that we can ensure this is to establish a global mineral traceability framework. And so 2 years ago, there was the UN Secretary General Panel Principles on Critical Energy Transition Minerals. So we believe this global mineral traceability framework should be tied to these principles. And the principles ensure that human rights, justice, and equity are at the core of all mineral value chains. So this includes institutionalized mechanisms that ensure meaningful and inclusive participation of local Indigenous community members, and also strong anti-corruption measures, public national beneficial ownership registries, as well as transparency and accountability measures. And also building off of some of the points that Luke had mentioned, we also believe that having a global minerals framework institutionalized in UNFCCC processes is necessary to ensure that the material dimensions of the Paris agreements, such as NDC targets and renewable energy, as well as Julie mentioned, the recent electrification targets announced at Bonn, are recognized and upheld within international climate law. So this ensures that transition minerals in the affected communities are included within all of these discussions. And so we see opportunity within the Just Transition Mechanism established last year and the Just Transition Work Program to be negotiation lanes where transition minerals can be addressed within the Paris agreements for the first time in history. And just in line as well, why the UNFCCC process is an important arena for transition mineral justice is that in line with the Paris agreements, the framework for a global mineral traceability guideline and framework should also adhere to the common but differentiated approach to address the disproportionate impacts of transition mineral mining and its impacts on intensifying climate inequity for climate vulnerable, low-income mineral producing nations such as the Philippines and frontline communities hosting transition minerals. As I had mentioned, they are amongst some of the most climate vulnerable, energy secure, and poverty stricken communities in the world, and the energy transition is intensifying this. And so we understand that climate equity approaches should be operationalized alongside the main components of the global mineral traceability framework. And this includes financial incentives as well for these frontline communities to have access to opportunities for shared prosperity and also climate mitigation efforts. And so that's a quick update on my end. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a quick one, but very complete one with many ideas from the local to the global level. Maybe then I'll turn to you, Luc, because you were talking about transition minerals as well, and I know you also had some ideas. So if you just want to add or complement to what Angela has been sharing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First thing off, Angela was just mentioned work program track, and yeah, it is going to be a key space for minerals if we play it, let's say, diplomatically, because it's often being framed as a trade issue, and trade is being blocked out of this process. And so we must be very careful when bringing up minerals in that space, in framing this as a means of implementation issue. It's a COP lingo problem, but it's actually quite key. Transition minerals are indeed going to be central to that debate, but it can inflame the room, and we have no interest in inflaming the room. So heading to Baku for the 6th dialogue of the Just Mentioned Work Program, this dialogue will be focusing on clean industrialization. So of course, minerals will be addressed because industrialization equals minerals value addition. But the Global North will try to block this language out by saying, this is a trade issue, this is a trade issue, this is a trade issue. So we need to be careful in how we bring this topic in. Secondary to this, and directly connected to it, this trade is out of the Just Transition Work Program to protect it is something that needs to be accepted. To frame specific trade policy in COP process, there's another track now called the Dialogue on Trade and Climate Change. This is a new space that can be very much used to fight this forum shopping from the Global North. So the push on the WTO and the World Bank to actually reform their system and create what can be called a climate peace clause to allow Global South countries to enact transition critical policies without being sued. This push can come from the dialogue on trade and climate change. That's the second bit. The third bit is breaking the tech monopolies that prevent value addition in yet another way. The immediate battleground is the Belém Technology Implementation Program. There is a tech mechanism in COP. It's being basically being an assistance desk, not a reform desk. And the IP debate, so the actual transfer, has been closed by the Global North years ago. It's being reopened, and tomorrow is the deadline for the submissions for the next dialogue that will happen in the next bond. So if you have time tonight, you can still write the submission. And finally, to come back to strictly minerals, there's something called the UAE dialogue on the means of implementation. This space can allow to directly link minerals and finance. Basically, the Global North is using minerals from the South to transition, and they are basing their transition on the restriction of the fiscal space in the South, while they are not complying with their own promise of delivering climate finance that they did in Rio 30 years ago. And so this space can be a real avenue to make it impossible for them to ignore that their green tech infrastructure relies on unjustly sourced materials and on fiscal instability in the Global South. And I will close on the final step, which is that in 2 COPs, COP 33, there's something called the Global Stocktake 2. So it's like a meta COP. It's a big momentum. What's in that Global Stocktake will be defined at Addis Ababa next year, COP 32, which is an African COP. So tech transfer, industrialization, energy sovereignty, they're going to be central to this COP. And this is a clear momentum. We have 18 months in front of us. In 6 months, there will be a key thing at this COP around the just transition mechanism. But in 18 months, the core topics that we need to fight for will be defined or not. Like, we have 18 months to actually achieve what we want to achieve. What I'm saying. Yeah, that is all.
Thanks. That's a lot of homeworks for 18 months. I have a question for you, but I want to make sure that Shehrzadae, you also have time to speak again. So I'm turning to you, and then if we have time, go back to you, Luc. So my question to you, Shehrzadae, after everything you shared, is that basically, I think I know the answer, but like, do you think the current financial architecture is fit for a just transition to renewables? And what do you think are the most priorities? What needs to be really addressed urgently if we want to switch that model?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is no, and we've seen that quite clearly across the last 30 or so years. We've seen this system where, focusing on debt servicing, focusing on the needs of the global north, focusing on creating more and more extractive industries in the global south has really amplified more of our issues than really solving anything. So I'll try to keep this brief. I think in terms of the pathways forward, the first step should be to address legacy issues that have been accumulating due to a lot of IFI involvement. The IMF, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, all of them need to be held accountable for their wrongdoings, and they need to play a role in reducing the debt that they have accumulated over these years across the global south. And so that should be a first part of the initiative. I mean, we saw during COVID, when debt was suspended for a while, that actually provided some useful fiscal space to a lot of global south countries that they needed, and we need to take that same attitude for the climate crisis. This is not a one-time small crisis. It's something that's evolving into something much bigger. So we need to create such initiatives to give them more space. The second is that relying on the development of green infrastructure through market mechanisms definitely needs to be moved. We need to move away from that. We've seen that in the development of carbon markets, and obviously as Angela and Luke have also described, the opening up of more extractive industries and extractive sectors across the global south to create more revenue and to create more value for the global north. In Pakistan, we see this with the Reko project, which is bringing in US and German investors for gold mining up in the north. We are seeing some critical mining being explored currently, and then offshore oil and gas development is now being considered as well. So all of these sectors that had been relatively closed for the last few years have started opening up again, despite the fact that we are, in the midst of a climate emergency and the need to channel more resources into adaptation, mitigation. Instead of that, we're seeing it go into more emissions-based sectors. Finally, I think we also need to move away from conversations of the underlying mechanisms of the international financial architecture, one that focuses on least cost optimization. We need to move away from that and into non-economic factors and focus on, as Angela mentioned, community needs and making sure that we are amplifying public spending to meet that. Finally, international mechanisms such as Paris, UNFCCC, Bonn, COP, they need to start recognizing the ills associated with the market, and they need to look at the alternatives that exist in local economies through indigenous practices. The most important component, I think, of all of this really should be the framing about energy access and the fact that we need to move away from energy as a commodity, as something that needs to be bought and sold. That's something that needs to be and we need to always make sure that the cost is always met and that the revenues are always enough according to the IFIs, right? It's an access debate, and especially in the global south where the intensity of the climate crisis is the heaviest. So the reframing of that narrative, I think, is the most important.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think it is something we can maybe end the webinar on. I don't see any questions on the chat. I don't know if any of you, Shehrzadae, Luc, Angela, you want to react to each other. We have like 2 more minutes, or no, don't think any answer. I had just one question for Luc, because Luc, you focused on the COP processes, like the just transition mechanism, the UAE dialogue, and so on. Outside of COP, do you also see like what would be the main priority for or the main thing that you think should be the priority outside of COP?
Yeah, actually, I focused on COP because that's the push for something. Sorry, yeah. The actual, sorry. So, both on the policy space limit, so what we talk about as WTO state-state being, judicial proceedings, or ISDS company state judicial proceedings, that's one slot, and the tech monopolies. All of this is outside of COP. This is on the policy space, there's WTO litigation, ISDS litigation, which is under the World Bank, and on tech is the TRIPS agreement, which is a trade-related IP agreement that applies to the whole world all the time. COP, its main value, according to our work lane, is to create momentum and political push for reforms outside. And so I'm hoping that a strong momentum in COP in 18 months can create momentum for at the WTO on policy space, a climate peace clause, in the World Bank on ISDS, an ISDS phase out, and at the WTO on tech, a TRIPS waiver or another form, reform of the TRIPS flexibility, whatever, it's technical. But all of this, IP concentration, policy space, and even, of course, fiscal space restriction, all of this sits outside. COP is creating a political momentum that allows for wider reform in a lot of spaces that we didn't have time to describe in this webinar. I can send the document if it's useful.
Yeah, I was about to suggest this, that I think we can conclude. I think we touched about many ideas and some of them may be a bit technical. So I think we will follow up with an email and the recording of this call where we can also add some resources for some of these topics if you want to look at this in more details. And we are on time. Just one thing that I realized we haven't mentioned is also like all the barriers at the national level and the kind of gaps we have also in the national legislation. So also something maybe we can add resources for in the email when we follow up. Thanks a lot, Luc, Shehrzadae, and Angela. That was very nice to have you. And thanks to everyone who also attended the webinar. And we can close it and have a nice rest of the day for everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Have a great day. Thank
Have a
you.
great day. Bye.